Hello there. Let's try now, as we come to the end of our material for this week, to bring these two accounts of history into conversation with each other. Foucault's and the understanding of history that emerges from Philippians chapter 2. And the question around which I want to stage this conversation is rupture of what? What is it that's being interrupted in these two accounts of history? Let's start with Foucault. Foucault's epistemic shifts the move from the Renaissance to the classical age, the classical to the modern. They are ruptures within a linear account of time, in the sense that each episteme exists within what Charles Taylor in A Secular Age calls secular time or profane time. Time is simply a line leading from the past through the present to the future. That linear secular time itself is not interrupted. It's just one thing after another within secular time. Why does Foucault insist on rupture? And I think it's helpful for us to have this in mind. Why is it strategic for him to have a history of ruptures? Well, it deprives the self, he says, of the reassuring stability of life and nature. In other words, we can't think that things have always been as they are now, and things will always be as they are now, so we needn't try and change anything. It takes away that stability from us. And it has the effect, he says, of showing that we are much freer than we feel, because things can be different to how they are now. We haven't always thought about things as we do now, and in the future, no doubt, we will think of things differently again. So that we're not constrained by a particular way of understanding the world. However, this idea of being much freer than we feel has its limits, because the logic of power, and we're going to talk more about power next week, remains constant. The way in which power is exercised in different historical periods for Foucault changes, but it's always action on the action of others. It's always linear in the way that I was explaining in the previous video. It's a way of exerting, constraining, manipulating the actions of other people. Whether we're in the Renaissance period or the classical or the modern, it's always action upon the action of others. So there are two things for Foucault that are not interrupted. Linear time itself and the paradigm of power as action upon the action of others. Things within those two frameworks change, but those remain constant. The biblical Great Reversal, however, does things differently. It ruptures the logic of power itself, as I was explaining in the previous video, Christ, God the Master, becoming a servant. You can't fit that into a linear account of the powerful exerting their power upon the less powerful. It breaks that paradigm. And it ruptures secular time as well. Christ, who is God, existing with God in all eternity, becoming a human being, entering into time, if you want to use that clumsy language. Charles Taylor talks about this as the higher time of eternity, where all instants are gathered together in one, breaking into secular linear time, which means that secular linear time itself is ruptured. It's opened up to something that is other than itself, to this higher time in the incarnation. So then I think that the two conclusions that I want to commend to your further thinking, therefore, are that the Bible's rupture is actually more fundamental than Foucault's, because it ruptures the paradigm of power itself, and it ruptures the very notion of time within which Foucault's epistemes all succeed each other. And therefore, the Bible fits Foucault's desire for us to be much freer than we feel, and to be destabilized in the reassurance that things are always as they are now, more fundamentally than Foucault's account of history can. It shows that more things can be different than Foucault's account does. So then, what does Philippians 2 give us in this V-shaped dynamic? I think it gives us a paradigm for understanding world history that resolves neither to a Hegelian dialectic that totalizes and gathers everything together, and that's a linear progress towards an end goal, nor to a Nietzschean or Foucauldian disjunctive succession of epistemes with no necessary progress from one to the other. It's neither of those things. it's giving us a third option. It's diagonalizing those two accounts of history. It does share Foucault's mistrust of the linear Enlightenment paradigm of history as an unbroken and inevitable progression towards a final perfection. You can't use the Bible to say that human beings are just getting better and better and better and finally will be perfect and everything will be great. The non-linear nature of the death of Christ, the rupture at the moment of the cross, doesn't allow that account of history. And thirdly, Foucault's ruptures remain within the basic structures of power relations and within linear secular time. But Philippians 2 begins to sketch out for us a way of subverting those structural prerequisites of power and of time themselves. Now that's a little bit of an amuse-bouche, a tasting menu for what I'm going to go into more depth in next week, which is to try and draw out some more of these implications of the Great Reversal in a different passage. But I hope that allows us to come to see that the Bible has a way of talking about history that can be brought into interesting conversation with Foucault, that sides with him, that aligns with his thought in some ways, and challenges his understanding, pushes his understanding further in other ways.